Auckland Tourism, Events and Economic Development is the region's economic development agency, helping to make Auckland a desirable place to live, work, visit, invest and do business.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I feel in the interest in diversity and inclusion, maybe I should start with Vitale, our only male member of the panel this morning. All of our panellists, ladies and gentlemen, haven't waited to be invited to dance. They've taken themselves to the dance. Just take one look at their CVs, all leaders in their own field, all putting it out there, all advocating and making change. So Vitale, I guess from my perspective, I mean, you've been at the forefront of change, going back into police, army, with Maori and Pacifica communities. What drove you into that and what has occurred during your period?
My journey started way back in the 1990s, and the organisation I was with had to respond to the growing diversity within that community. And basically it was a Pacific community. And the agency, the government wanted a response, and firstly it was with a milestone document. And what that was take a stock take of all the initiatives that impacted on as a response to that particular community. And fortunately I was given the opportunity to write the milestone document. And two things that came from that was that there was no specific responsiveness strategy towards that particular community, and secondly leadership, and how leadership had to be the forefront of writing that document. So leadership became my thing over the next 15-20 years, and growing that leadership within the organisation, because I believe that was the foundation of inclusiveness and diversity.
How have things changed in that period of time?
Oh, it's changed immensely. When I first started my journey, there were 4 managers in police who were Pacifica, and now it's multi-layered. There's assistant commissioners, area commanders, detective inspectors, and a whole sort of group of leaders and young leaders that are coming through. So from my perspective, in 20 years fast forward, diversity has been driven by leadership, and it's been very, very satisfying.
What is the importance, however, of driving that change yourself? What do you look for in the kind of people you've role-played and mentored into becoming leaders?
I guess I look at community people, that is people that don't come to work, and because the organisation exists in a community. So those people that come through, whatever ethnicity you are or gender, that you represent the community that you work in, that you work. So there's no two plays at it, and through that the passion comes. Because when I was there, we didn't have a lot of support in terms of that. So I did my BAU as well as owning that Pacific space for the organisation.
Rachel, I mean, you're heading up Diversity Works, and these sorts of organisations obviously have been through, I think people used to talk about employment opportunities trusts and those sorts of, advocacy in the past, but it's much broader now. What do you confront talking to businesses, talking to people about getting them to just not pay lip service to diversity and inclusion, but to actually introduce it?
One of the privileges of being a national body for workplace diversity and inclusion is seeing inside a whole lot of organisations. So we work with, for example, an engineering company in Whangarei who are still trying to get women's toilets so that they can employ female apprentices, right through to Vodafone, who have a complete diversity and inclusion ecosystem and can run their recruitment for support crew completely in Mandarin for their large Chinese customer base. We work with organisations that have been with the Equal Employment Opportunity Trust since we started, like Air New Zealand and Westpac, who are now working collaboratively on how to increase diversity in their supply chain. We also work together with the public service And for example, they've got their gender pay action plan. And one of their goals is by this time next year to have all their recruitment and remuneration processes free of bias. So there's an enormous amount of work going across all sorts of agencies to make sure that that happens, and we work with them and support them. So there's a huge range of work, and people approach workplace inclusion from a lot of different starting points.
What's your advice to those companies who are having difficulties? You talked about the need for a female toilet in an engineering firm. I mean, why is it so hard to get these put in place today? I mean, or could you just have a unisex toilet? I mean, what are the issues there?
I mean, I think this is an accessibility issue as well. But, you know, there are a whole lot of barriers. And actually, unless you ask your employees what they think those barriers are, sometimes when you're talking around a senior leadership table, you're using aggregated data, you're thinking about things into the future, and you're not looking at what are some of the simple things that you could invest in right now to make everything more accessible and inclusive for your employees. And as Ziena said, you know, the more inclusive your organisation is, the more attractive it's going to be to the talent pool you want to access in the future.
Thank you. Trudie, Simon touched on the work that you've been doing with MB on capturing the diversity dividend of New Zealand. Can you just sort of scope out what that involves? But also, what are those early showings?
Yeah. Well, one of the entries is quite a large program of research across two universities, Waikato University and Massey University. The particular project that I've been working on is looking at older adults and how they negotiate a sense of home, a sense of place, a sense of community in an ethnically diverse neighbourhood and a population that is rapidly changing. And really interesting that the international research tells us that older adults are very resistant to change. They don't like change, they fear change, they will sort of defend their position, to adopt a defensive stance. But actually what our research says is that the older adults we've worked with are really wanting to embrace diversity. They see their local neighbourhood changing and they have a deep desire to understand the other, to borrow your language. They want to understand, they want engagement, but there are also these challenges that they need to work out how to negotiate. So those older adults we're working with are not, they're all retired, but some of them are recently retired, and it seems as though there's a wonderful possibility of harnessing that desire to understand the other, to live in an inclusive environment, an inclusive community. A workplace is, after all, a community, to actually be able to harness that for those older adults who are still in the paid workforce.
So how do you translate that desire that you're seeing in the community to be part of an inclusive environment? How do you actually translate that and migrate that into the workplace?
I have a sense from the research that we've carried out that many people have have adopted that stance. They actually do want to work in an inclusive environment that accounts for multiple facets of difference. You know, in our introduction today, we talked about, there was a discussion about the intersection of different categories of difference. And when we think about diversity, it's often so easy to reduce that down to singular categories. But actually, when we go into the workplace, we bring the whole of ourselves, don't we? I don't only bring my gender, I also bring all of the facets of me into the workplace that find ways of materialising in different ways. And so I think there is room for engagement at different levels, actually, sort of creating a space for participation, contribution, creating an environment that is open to listening to that diversity of perspectives and experiences. Bringing experiential knowledge is absolutely vital for the workplace, not only that kind of top-down understanding of diversity practices, but actually creating a space for experiential knowledge also.
Thank you. Minnie, you're partially sighted, as we heard before. Yes, you are. And, but you've set up this organisation called Be Accessible. What drove you to do that, and how are you actually incorporating what comes from that into the workplace?
Okay. Yes, I am partially sighted, and it was a mixture of, I think, equal parts inspiration and desperation, if I'm really honest. I loved the metaphor before about the dance. What was it? Being invited, being asked to dance. I'm like, I'm being the DJ. So I think I got to a point where I was so, I just couldn't believe the lack of awareness and inclusion around accessibility. In a country like New Zealand, which prides itself on equity, to, in the 21st century, have an unemployment rate of 46% of people with access needs who could be employed. If that was any other group, we'd be absolutely outraged. And so what I realised is if I kept waiting for someone else to step up, take the leadership on, I guess, to actually try and do things a bit differently, I might be waiting a long time. Not to say there aren't people doing fabulous work and have been doing fabulous work for a long time, but I felt we needed to take a really fresh look at accessibility in the 21st century. And so a group of us got together almost exactly 8 years ago, actually, and decided to set up our own social change organisation called Be Accessible. And as the name suggests, we want the world to be inclusive and accessible. So that sort of sits at the heart of it, if you like. So what do we do? So because 25% of the population has an access need, if we as businesses, organisations, government, whatever our form, actually want to reflect our population, surely we must mirror at least that 25% at all levels of the organisation. So what we decided to do was to create a program where we can go in and work alongside organisations who might be at an event like this and go, do you know, I want to do this, I don't know where to begin. And so we created a program where we can walk alongside organisations to do exactly that and actually demystify this. It's not rocket science. And I think that's the thing, given that, just a nice little reference, man landed on the moon this week, 50 years ago. It's not as hard as that. Well, it was interesting, it was 3 men. Anyway, if it was now, we'd be on the moon. But
we're here.
It looks quite spooky. But so it was really about how do we demystify this space. When I was 20, as a young woman who was partially blind, I remember a family friend saying, Minnie, what do you think you'll do as a job? Will you work in a call centre? Now, there's nothing wrong with working in a call centre, but I just graduated with my first degree at 19, and that was the only thing he could imagine a blind woman could do. Now, that's problematic. So we have to let go of these limiting beliefs we've got and these terrible boxes that we're putting people into. So I don't know if that answered your question because I went on a bit of a rant.
Okay. Sorry. No. It's a good rant to have. I mean, just drawing a parallel, Ziena, with this self-limiting, kind of attitude that people have with people with disabilities or accessibility needs. I mean, we see that, don't we, in terms of Asian populations in particular, people who come here from another country and their qualifications are not accepted, for instance. How do those people, what advice do you have for those people, how to counter these attitudes in the workplace?
I think just give it a go, really. I've had some roles which no one looking like me has had before, and quite sadly, no one has since. But I got them because I applied for them, and also I had great sponsors. Usually older white men. There's actually one in the audience here today who gave me my first job about 20 years ago, who still supports me, all these years later. And I think for people who are diverse, finding those networks, not just networks within our own community, but moving out, getting to know different people and forming those networks. And other thing that I'd say on that is just be a bit kinder to yourself. I think for those people who do go into those roles, you feel like, you're being judged more because no one like you has done this role before, and it's the same, in the case of accessibility. So you feel like you're being judged more. You have to perform even better than everyone else. You have to give more. But you also have the weight of your whole community on your shoulders, and you don't want to let them down because you worry that if you didn't do a good job, then no one will hire anyone else looking like you or with the same kind of physical disability because they think it's just too hard. So yeah, go out, put yourself out, but find those friends, find those support networks, and just be a bit kinder to yourself.
I mean, it is hard, isn't it, Vitale, to move beyond, I guess, tokenism, something that used to, it used to affect women as well in the workplace. Obviously, others who are not part of the predominant Pākehā European culture.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit more about how you go about that.
What I used to challenge staff with was don't do what the organisation wants you to do what you want to do. And quite often organisations compartmentalise you into where they think you should be. And in Pacifica, it was around community, youth work and so forth. And to be a leader and to be able to lead in that organisation, you have the breadth and width of experience, and you can't gain that if you do what the organisation thinks you're better at. So leadership to me was being good at what you do, going through the experiences of the whole organisation and growing your leadership there, and having the courage to do that.
I mean, I think that this really brings out the fact that the diversity and inclusion journey in a workplace is individual and organisational. And I do have a bit of an issue with us putting everything on people who are considered diverse. That they are the ones that have to step up, that they are the ones that have to create these solutions. Because as organisations, we have to look at our systems. And if you think about, we talk to members all the time who've been working, for example, in gender equality and trying to bring more women through into senior leadership. And they get exhausted because they put a whole lot of energy, personal energy in behind that, but the results don't come through. And the reason behind that is because we're not picking apart our systems and processes. And look, changing a policy or looking at a process, looking at an employee life cycle and seeing at the attraction, at the recruitment, at the induction, promotion stages, where is bias hiding? And how can we pick that apart and bring that back together? So yes, I absolutely agree that those of us who want to stand up and be counted need to have the courage to do that, but also those of us who are leaders in organisations need to create the systems change that allows that to happen.
Sorry, can I just add, I thought it was quite interesting, the Diversity Works report that recently came out showed that over 50% of the respondents of the organisations recognised that there was bias in their own practices, in their recruitment practices, in their promotions process, and in the way that they set pay rates, for example. Over 50%. So on the one hand, that sounds like a terrible figure, of course, but on the other, perhaps it could be looked at quite favourably, that, in terms of being aware of the work that actually needs to be done, and then, as you say, looking at the policy, the strategic direction, but also challenging those cultural norms of the workplace as well.
I'm conscious that we're going to go very shortly to the audience, and I hope you've got your questions ready and are voting for them. But Trudie, I'd just like to bring in the issue you've raised about how you incorporate older workers in the workplace, and how do you actually get everybody with the disparate ages, ethnicities, sexes in the workplace to play together?
It's challenging, isn't it? I'm not sure that I have the answer, but it's really interesting to think that we are an ageing population. The world, around the globe, it is an ageing population, and New Zealand is no different. We have, 20% of our workforce is aged 55 and over. But really interestingly, again to refer back to the Diversity Works report, consideration about ageing in respect to diversity is not really on the agenda of organisations. It's kind of fallen away as something that needs to be considered or needs to be thought through. And in fact, the research showed that there are very few policies and strategies, so that top-down kind of thinking. At the very same time as the research shows that there is less likelihood of encouraging the recruitment of workers aged 55 plus. So I'm not sure that I'm answering your question. I think I'm answering a question that comes before that, perhaps, of how do we address the recruitment strategies in the first instance, and then creating an environment, a cultural norm that accounts for a multiplicity of difference.
I think the other thing to that, friend, though, is that there's, recruitment of new workers who might be older, but you already have so many in your own organisation. And it's a case of not losing sight of the value that they can bring. I mean, they would make great mentors. They would make great coaches. But also the buddy system, because it's not just that the older worker can teach the younger one. The younger one can perhaps teach quite a few things. So, pairing people up and looking at the value that everyone brings.
Thank you. Just before we go to Simon, if I can just ask you each briefly, what's your biggest piece of advice for getting started with diversity and inclusion? And this is just very brief. Perhaps if we start with you, Minnie.
Oh, okay. Well, I think if you actually want to employ someone with an access need and just get started, give us a call.
Right.
I mean, quite serious. Well, actually, it's actually not. I'm quite genuine about it. We have a program at the moment with 30 amazing, talented people that we're struggling to place, who have all the skills that employers say that they need right now in tech and design and HR.
So you in the audience, call Minnie, okay?
Yeah, or my team.
Or her team. Right.
And just start. I think that would be the thing.
We got
start.
it.
I think for me it comes back to one word: listen. Sometimes we're so busy talking, we're so busy planning, we're so busy with a sort of a top-down view that we forget to just take a step back and have a look, survey what the situation might be, and think about how we might best respond and work with people rather than kind of on people, if you like. So listen.
Okay.
Mine is that the why is much more important than the how. However you get started is the right place to start. But it's really important that you know your personal why, and also that you're very clear about what is the reason why your organisation wants to embed inclusion.
And mine's looking at 20 years of evolution. Back in the 1990s, I saw leadership as a cornerstone of diversity and inclusiveness, and I still believe that. Yeah, so look at your leadership structures.
Yeah, I think similar to what people have said, just start. Start somewhere. That's better than being nowhere. But also can't stress enough the importance of leadership in an organisation. The leaders themselves setting the tone, but the leadership that each one of us brings.
Okay. Thank you. Simon.
Thank you very much, Fran. Thank you very much to the panel. We've got plenty of thought-provoking ideas already on the table, and I've got dozens of questions, literally. So in the spirit of democracy, yes, we're going to go straight to the ones that are most upvoted, and this one is excelling all of them. We have a long way to go. How do we get buy-in at exec level where leaders are all very similar, this person has a future in diplomacy, and do not currently show interest in a D&I policy? Let's start with our keynote.
I knew you'd do that. I think at the leadership table, people often make decisions based on results, and often financial results. And I think there is enough data out there to show the leadership team that if they don't act on this, then they lose out. Profitability suffers, on so many levels. The ability to attract staff, the ability to be relevant to your customers and your stakeholders. I mean, there's a Volvo ad on TV now that comes before you read the news, Simon. And it shows, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with it, but it shows that women tend to get injured more in car crashes because the test dummies were all made to a male physique. Now you wonder how many women were on that team that was developing that. That's a real issue, not just because you are selling cars that are unsafe, but people are dying because of that. And I think if leadership teams were shown this data, then they would be more open to actually making changes because their bottom line suffers.
Rachel, would you like to comment on that?
Well, I think it's really interesting. I was lucky enough to speak with Marilyn Waring the other day, and she said to me, look, when I first started out in the 1970s, there wasn't all this data. And so it was a different conversation. Yeah. But she said, Rachel, there is all this data now, and now there's just willful ignoring. Mm. And I think that one of the things we need to be able to do when we're talking at a senior leadership level is think about the language that they're using now. That's the language of risk management, that's the language of strategy, and that's the language of aggregated data. And one of the ways I think that you can get in there is also to bring stories and anecdote as well as that aggregated data. But if you look at the New Zealand Defence Force and the massive investment they made in their sexual ethics and responsible relationships program, the whole business case around that was around risk management. You cannot send a team of people into Afghanistan to be peacekeepers with a sexual predator in the middle of that team.
Diversity and inclusion needs to be integrated into everything. It's not just a silo topic, is it? That's the point.
Yeah.
All right. The next most popular question, I'm going to incorporate it with another one. It's from Shan. You've got a name to this one. How do you balance the diversity and inclusion requirements with the talent and qualification requirements of a role? Which gets the priority? Straightforward question, but I'm going to put another spin on it because this one's anonymous and it's just down the list a little. Being a woman leader in an organisation, I want to know I got there on my merits and not to fill a quota. How do we balance that in a workplace? Who would like first go at this one?
I guess from personal experience and what I advocated for was that people join an organisation to do the best they can. And they work hard, and through that comes opportunities and naturally promotion. And when I joined the organisation, I wasn't looking at my colour. I wanted to be a leader in my own right, to be a good example. And it wasn't until later on in my career that people in my communities were saying, oh, you're Pacific Island, you're the role model. But I never started out that way. I wanted to be the very best person I can in the organisation. So it was just because of my ethnicity that towards the end I was being celebrated in those communities. So I guess going back to that question was, you join an organisation, you be the best you can, leadership will come irrespective of ethnicity or gender.
So you think the cream will rise to the top, that we have a fully meritorious environment?
In the organisation I used to belong to, yes.
Yes, but not everyone is doing that. Not everyone. No, there's a lot of...
But it's taken many decades of trying.
I think all of us want to be hired on merit.
Sorry, we'll just bring up designer's mic. Oh, it's just... Yeah.
I think all of us want to be hired on merit. No one wants to be given a job because you just filled ticked some boxes. But it's the definition of merit, and it's what information we use to decide what merit is. And a lot of the time that's based on what's worked in the past. So if you're looking at what's worked in the past, your women weren't the leaders, your society wasn't as diverse as it is now from an ethnicity point of view. You didn't have, a partially blind CEO, female CEO. You didn't have those things. Amazon did this thing around using AI to try and sort of blind CVs and get rid of any kind of diversity metrics. And what they found was because it was built using data from the previous 10 years, it was biased towards men. Yeah. So even CVs that had something as simple as saying, someone went to something or other women's university, the CV got rejected because a woman wasn't seen as being able to be successful in that role. So yes, merit's great, but what biases exist.
You've got to
in terms
overcome
of your definition of
institutionalised
merit.
bias and templates that favour a pre-existing situation.
Yeah.
Well, I also just going to jump in here.
Please do.
I think we're at risk at the moment of taking something that is richly textured as diversity, inclusion, and I would add accessibility, because often that actually just gets left off, and trying to simplify it into a tick box exercise. And that is very dangerous, because it doesn't allow for the intersectional aspects of us as human beings, and it's trying to, I think, it just loses the richness. So I think as organisations starting on this journey, I agree, it's about starting wherever you can. I think that's absolutely the key, but not expecting you can just do 10 things and tick, I'm done. I think that's quite dangerous, and I think there is a real risk of that approach.
How should we urge employers to approach it in a modern situation then?
What was that, Simon?
How should we urge employers to approach hiring in a modern situation?
Well, I think it's just, I think, again, things that have been said, it's that openness, being ready to actually look outside, perhaps replicating yourself and the team that you have if it doesn't look already richly diverse. It's finding out perhaps how diverse your team is to start with. So I think it's really important to do, surveys of your current staff, because actually sometimes you'll be surprised actually at the diversity in your team. Over half of people with access needs. It's invisible. So you might even have a more diverse team than you actually realise to start with. So there's something about gathering data, finding out, and then I think it's that, but it is the listening, keeping open. And I think it's something to do with high trust, which is also at the opposite end of a very risk, fearful-based approach to employment, which again can creep in.
Just coming back to the... Oh, sorry.
Oh, we've got them going now.
Oh.
We're away. Trudie.
Excellent. Go, Trudie.
I was just going to add that data is often really helpful for illuminating a key issue. So Ministry for Women in 2017 carried out some research to explore the gender pay gap. We know that it's around 9%, and it just sustains. It just keeps on going. It doesn't seem to get any lower. And how that it's often explained is the kind of work that women do, don't get to the upper echelons of management, the patterns of participation, etc. What their research showed was that actually that only accounts for 20% of that pay gap. What about that other 80%? What's actually going on there? So I think when we have data, empirical evidence like that, it demands of us that we actually take a step back and what is going on. And that, of course, comes back to either gender discrimination in this instance or unconscious bias, which requires even further kind of self-interrogation and reflexivity of the upper echelons.
I was just going to mention to the audience that our own GCSB, which has incredible qualification requirements, the fact that you have to be from a Five Eyes country before you can be employed there, a lot of security checking and so on. They've done some fantastic work around recruiting and diversity, and in fact their strategy is all written out and available publicly online. So if they can do that with their qualification requirements, then so can every other organisation.
We are really running out of time rapidly. Thank you so much for that, and I know you're very engaged in this, and I just want to have some quick fire hit questions if someone will have a go at them. The inevitable question: are middle-aged white men penalised in D&I discussions? It would appear that diversity means anything but being a white middle-aged cis male.
Look, I would like to stand up and say that I feel very tired by this people owning this pale male and stale. What about saying I'm a wise person who wants to use my male privilege and my white privilege to lead New Zealand to become more inclusive?
And don't you attract more, what's the expression, you attract more flies with honey than vinegar? It's as if we almost have to need a category of people that we need to diminish in order to make ourselves feel better, and it's just flipping the cart. I think of Mandela in South Africa and so on, and he didn't go and look at South Africa now. It's a far more inclusive society as a result of not taking a victim approach and not taking a blame approach. Anyway, I'm off on my hobby horse. White middle-aged man. Just one last one, because I think, two quick ones. What can junior staff members do if their workplace is not diverse and inclusive? Pray. Okay.
Actually, Simon, that's really interesting when we think about...
Trudie, Trudie's mic, please.
I don't know that I'm answering the question exactly, but what we're seeing is greater gender diversity. We have far more young people expressing gender in very different ways now. We have more people identifying with the rainbow community. We have people identifying as non-binary. What does this mean for the workplace? This is raising all sorts of really interesting questions, and I don't actually know... I don't know the answer.
Sorry.
Okay.
You okay, Fran?
It wasn't subtle.
Okay, I'm going to be quiet now.
I
think that possibly might have been a strategic cough.
Mic drop.
So I don't know that I can answer your question, but I think we need to be prepared for new expressions of diversity, new intersections of diversity hitting the workplace very, very soon. And actually, let's give some room. Let's create some room because, wow, what might those young people do? Actually, harness that energy, that verve, that excitement, that vigour. Harness it.
I so love your optimism and enthusiasm. I'm right there with you.
And I think millennials are going to walk. Sorry.
Was internal networking groups that we set up, and that was very powerful, where diversity, Pacifica, but a lot of non-Pacific people came to those, and it drew strength and also networking within a workplace.
So find a community of similar-minded people?
Give us a coffee, whatever it is, but it just grows, and from there you get confidence and be able to
collective
talk
strength
in terms of, whether it's promotion, whatever issues arise.
We have run out of time, and I'm sorry for the organisers. I'm going to have one last question. I'm going to direct it straight to you, Rachel, because this is the most popular question left over. What organisations in New Zealand are excelling in the D&I workplace? Let's put some exemplars out there.
Look, I think that our financial institutions, so particularly banks, have been working really hard in this space for a number of years. But 40% of our members have less than 50 employees. And the best place to find all the exemplars is actually on our website. We have the case studies of every organisation that's ever entered the New Zealand Diversity Awards. There's video, there's case studies. They're our most downloaded resource.
diversityworksnz.co.nz?
.org.nz.
diversityworks.org. diversityworksnz.org.nz.
Thanks, Simon.
All right. Look, I'll get the promo out there while I can. And while I'm doing that too, my apologies to Massey University. They've been with PwC Herald Talks since the very beginning. I think I messed them out in the beginning, but Massey University, a wonderful supporter of this, and much appreciated Trudie's presence here as well. Ladies and gentlemen, we are out of time. So let me just say, firstly, our next event is on the 25th of September. It's right here. It's called the Global Marketplace. We're shifting topic, and tickets go on sale today at iticket.co.nz. But thank you very much today to our speakers and our panellists. Much appreciated. Please give them a big round of applause.
Auckland Tourism, Events and Economic Development is the region's economic development agency, helping to make Auckland a desirable place to live, work, visit, invest and do business.